You probably recognize the image. The white bonnet, the red cloak. The image of this submissive and oppressed woman has become increasingly recognized in pop culture as a handmaid, the character upon which is centered the Emmy Award-winning series based on Margaret Atwood's best-selling novel. The series documents the life of June, a fertile woman forced into sexual and reproductive servitude following a worldwide infertility epidemic. June lives in a dystopian society of Gilead, a nation led by religious extremists who've taken over America. Even if you haven't seen the show, the recognizable image of the Puritan-like handmaid probably calls to mind the subject of women's oppression. As a citizen critic and a woman, I'd like to explain from a female perspective how The Handmaid's Tale has been a profound influence on American feminism and the women's rights movement. Today I'd like to talk to you about how the series has become a persuasive cultural artifact because of its relevance during the time of intense political controversy, its relatability, and its provocative subject matter. The thought-provoking subject matter lends itself to the buzz the series has created. The material may be extreme, and yet it never feels too foreign. In fact, in a 2017 interview with the LA Times, Atwood maintained that the book was not science fiction but speculative fiction, meaning the events could happen. In fact, in her 2018 book of essays, Julie Peters and Andrea Wolpers chart the course of the current women's rights movement. The collection of feminist essays perspectives tackle subjects such as rape, sex trafficking, female genital mutilation, and coercive methods of population control. Does this sound familiar? The series portrays fertile women being routinely raped, impregnated, and forced to bear children for government officials. Female circumcision is also used as a method of punishment for fertile women who have been found out to have sexual relationships with other women. Also portrayed is how religious extremists skew familiar Bible verses and theology to manipulate the citizens of Gilead and justify their horrific acts. Douglas Pratt lays out the paradigm of religious fundamentalism in his 2010 study on religious extremism. The paradigm begins with passive fundamentalism, principle presupposition, and implicit verifications. Through flawed rhetoric, this evolves into impositional fundamentalism characterized by enacted extremism, terrorism, and explicit justification. The plot of The Handmaid's Tale follows this paradigm to show how the religious extremists went from an underground cult to taking over America. This and the aforementioned human rights violations depicted in the series may be fiction, but for many they feel all too real. In fact, plot devices from the show have been popping up in real life all over the world. This is because the series appropriately responded to the exigence, airing during a time of heightened political tensions among women's rights activists following the 2016 election. You may remember the Women's Rights March following the election, a reproductive rights protest responding to comments and prospective policies promised by newly elected conservative politicians. Christine Hauser, a journalist from the New York Times, reported in 2017 on similar marches in America worldwide and where protesters wore the red habits and the white bonnets from The Handmaid's Tale. These protests in the U.S. target policies of the Republican and conservative parties mainly. These parties are largely favored by fundamentalist Christians who have, according to Elena Viola in her 2002 essay on feminism and fundamental Christianity, have been, quote, accompanied by a vigorous promotion of enforcement of gender roles whose explicit intent entails the subordination of women, end quote. Now, as a Christian myself, I'm in no way attacking religion or even Republicans. The point I'm trying to make, and Viola and The Handmaid's Tale are trying to make, is how extremists of every major religion enforce gender oppression, and they use their manipulative theology to influence politics. It exists in Christianity, Islam, and even Judaism. According to Viola, it's common for radical fundamentalists to skew theology to manipulate and control their followers. This is precisely the premise of The Handmaid's Tale, and therefore has served as a useful tool in the current political climate. Not only is the series relevant to the occasion, but also to its audience. The series is relatable to American women who have long ignored human rights atrocities that have occurred for centuries and continue today. In a 1993 United Nations, they published a report on women's rights. It's outlined how women are often blamed for infertility, subjected to third-party, i.e. male authorization to gain access to reproductive health services. They're subjected to early marriage and even genital mutilation. In the LA Times interview, Atwood herself stated that all the oppressive acts from the book occur somewhere in the world. Of course, these subjects don't lack attention from activist groups, but why is it now that social media is chock full of tweets with the subject of women's rights violations, and often they're accompanied by #Handmaid's Tale? And why are there hundreds of women's rights protests with women wearing costumes from the show? Because the main characters of the series undergoing oppression are relatable American women. As much as I hate to admit it, I'm also guilty of this phenomenon. Several years ago, I learned that my aunt was subjected to female genital circumcision in her home country of Ethiopia. Of course, when I heard of this, I was shocked, angry, I was very sad for her, but admittedly, these feelings faded rather quickly. When I watched the scene from The Handmaid's Tale that shows the range of emotions that Handmaid goes through after she wakes from anesthesia and learning that she'd been circumcised, I cried. The Handmaid is portrayed by Alexis Bledel, who you may know as Rory from Gilmore Girls. She's a blue-eyed, white, all-American girl. I cried when I watched this episode. I truly have felt the emotions portrayed by Bledel. Why did I react this way to a fictional scene and not to learning that this actually happened to my own aunt in what was probably an even more gruesome procedure? I think it was because it was unexpected to see a white woman, someone like me, go through something like this. I don't fault the show for this, I fault myself. The show pointed out to me just how comfortable I was in my own position of American white privilege and safety. But these rights and safeties have been threatened. Though it's fiction, The Handmaid's Tale, because of its relatability and relevance, has depicted just how quickly and how far these rights can be violated, and it's already begun. Obviously, the women's rights movement has many factors and influences. Now that we've seen the media attention and protests, it's just as obvious that The Handmaid's Tale is one of them. Thank you very much.